Good morning, committee members. I'd ask that you please take your seats and sign in. If anyone has their electronic devices turned to silent or vibrate, that'd be greatly appreciated. We have one consent item for information, CSD 67, 2017, which is agenda item 6.1. Would committee members be willing to move the receipt of this item to immediately before the items for consideration? Moved by Councillor Timms, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Quirk. Thanks. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thanks very much. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this morning? Councillor Timms.
Chairman, if we get to the discussion of the development charges issue, I have the indirect pecuniary interest as the family business may be affected by those policies.
Okay, that's noted. Thank you. Seeing no other, there are no presentations this morning and no delegations. We'll move to CSD 67, 2017, Niagara Regional Police Back Office Review. Is there a mover and seconder to be received? Moved by Councillor Volpatis. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Quirk. Any questions or comments on this item?
Chair, what item is it?
It's item 6.1, CSD 67.
Okay, thanks. 6.1.
Councillor Augustine.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I read this particular item with interest, and I guess the overall question is we're receiving it like the idea from the board was great and had a lot of merit to say, are there ways in which we can work closer together? So I commend the board for that. By the way the report's written, it appears it's sort of like, it's almost like we're going to agree to disagree. What's the action out of this, I guess? What's the concrete action? There's certain recommendations in the KPMG report. What's going to happen out of this? I mean, it's good to have the discussion. It seemed like culture was an issue, as was said, uniformed versus, or I forget the terminology, but officers that are there and the police saying that those officers shouldn't be doing it, should be civilians doing it. So I guess the general question, Mr. Chair, is what's the outcome out of this great work?
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll look to the acting commissioner.
Thank you. Through the chair, the police in Niagara Region met actually last Friday to assign staff individuals to each of the points that KPMG had raised, and they're going to come back to solutions on those items. Solutions or recommendations or further options for both of those, because they may require changes either at the region or at police or both. So the items that were listed in the report, we're going to work with the police on. If there was any further items, that's when the report kind of said we would want further direction at that point in time. So anything outside of the report.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, it's simply we started this process, here's the report, and it's a work in progress.
CIO?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Yeah, through you, Chair, to committee members. The commissioner and I, we met with the police chief and a deputy police chief. We went through an exercise. We assigned staff to each of the recommendations and then looking at alternative options. And so there's an action plan. We plan to go through all the recommendations and then report back to our respective bodies.
Okay, thanks very much. And just in terms of the timing, I thought there was, I think when the police board went into it, there was hope that maybe something could be achieved for 2018 budget. It sounds, now that we've started budget, it sounds like we're not necessarily along that timeline, because it would have to be done very quickly. So can we just hear about timeline, and then I'll cede the floor. Thanks.
Acting CO, acting commissioner.
Thank you. Through the chair, there will be limited monetary savings in 2018 on the recommendations. So they will be worked on during the remainder of this year and into 2018. I think there's some efficiency and service level improvements that will happen, which just means someone who was tied up with 8 hours of processing something may now only have 2 hours, and they can then put their 6 hours towards something else. It doesn't actually drive a dollar savings, but will drive some efficiency savings so that they can do more work with less time. So we're not forecasting, from the region's point of view, we're not forecasting any major savings. The police may be forecasting some minor monetary savings. KPMG is actually going to go away, and the partner from KPMG is in the audience, and put a very rough dollar estimate on the amount for total. That wasn't really required, but he's going to go back and do that, and that will be part of a subsequent report back.
Okay, thanks. I do have just another half question, and that is, it's not only dollars, but it's also reducing risk and tracking dollars and internal, mechanisms, et cetera. So I look forward to hearing more about not only the dollars saved, but also the efficiencies found and the ongoing reduction of risk in terms of following those dollars through the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And although I don't speak on behalf of the board, I can say that the Police Services Board did receive this report at committee, and the chief is taking it seriously in the recommendations therein as well on an operational basis. Councillor Petrowski.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions. To what extent, because there's a reference at the top of page 3 about EFMS, to what extent is EFMS integrated with NRPS, just for an understanding on that?
Through the chair, NRP is fully integrated with EMS. Each business, our whole enterprise has moved over to that, call it EFMS or PeopleSoft platform. So they have implemented on the NRP side completely. The police just have, they've had a few more challenges than some of the other business units at the region implementing EFMS.
Okay, thanks. And with regards to the specific comment about decentralization of data input to sworn officers, what's an example of that?
Through the chair, an example is from a budgeting point of view. What EFMS did when we came in, before EFMS, there might have only been 50 people in this organization or 60 people that actually touched the accounting system. With EFMS, if you're a budget owner, you have to, you control your budget, and part of the controlling of the budget is ensuring that the appropriate authorizations are granted by those who control the budget. So when a bill comes in for some type of supply that the NRP is using in a particular unit, so K9 unit, that sergeant who's in charge of that, he will have to actually approve in the system, the dog food purchase or whatever that's required in that unit, where before that didn't necessarily happen. It was more centralized. So now the actual people who are on the ground running the businesses are approving the invoices. And that's where some of that decentralized information is hinted at.
Okay, thanks. So follow up to that, has the decentralization been triggered because of the EFMS then? Or is this a philosophical change at NRPS?
Through the chair, it was best practice from an accounting system that those who are spending the money are also responsible for the money. So I would say it was triggered by EFMS and the philosophy of budget accountability to the ones who are spending the money.
Okay, but the way I read it, thank you, Chair, is that that's a negative now that those people are doing that. It seems to me that's a positive to hold accountability back to the people who are spending it, but yet it reads like it isn't, because the closing comment is that leading practices indicate they're being underutilized when performing functions that can be delivered by civilian staff. So is it staff's impression that civilian staff at NRPS should be responsible for the expenditures of sworn duty officers, that fundamentally civilian staff have absolutely no control over what spending is done at the field or operational level? So maybe somebody could explain why you're making that last statement. So EFMS triggers this, they're doing it, and yet we're saying that's a negative. I don't understand that.
So through the chair, that's a great question, and it's kind of two opposing views. what KPMG had listed in the report is for a staff sergeant, the staff sergeants, for example, might not be as efficient in processing their accounting requirements through it. And from an efficiency point of view, it might be better to have civilian staff who are not paid as much and who are processing more activities and are better at processing it, do it. So versus the other approach from a budgetary control point of view, saying you're responsible for if you want to be responsible for the budget, then you should take on these administrative responsibilities. So that's one of the things that the team is going back to look at is what things maybe we're asking a little bit too much of some of the NRP staff from an efficiency point of view, and they should maybe not control everything that's been assigned to them in their budget and only maybe move some of their stuff in their budget within EFMS to a centralized unit or not. But it's kind of a conflicting point where you have people who are maybe spending too much time to complete a transaction at too high of a dollar amount, do it from an efficiency point of view.
Okay, thanks. So the CAO mentioned he had a conversation with the chief. Was that McGuire or with McCullough now? Or have you revisited it with McCullough? And which deputy was involved? Because I believe they split between operational and, what do you want to call it, administrative. I think the administrative deputy now is Flynn. I believe the previous deputy was Joe Matthews. So are you folks in between a manpower gap here, and perhaps Chief McCullough would have a different approach? And what is the CAO's plan to revisit this if the first conversations were with McGuire?
CAO?
Our conversations is with the new chief and the new deputy chief. The deputy chief is Bill Forty. I can tell through you, Chair, to this committee, it's a very positive working relationship that the commissioner and I have with the senior management at Police Services. So that's where once we received the KPMG study, we met with the chief and the deputy chief. It was a very positive meeting. We had a subsequent meeting where we assigned tasks to our respective staff. Now that we have an action plan, we're now going to be meeting again once those deliverables start making back to the table. So it's a very positive working relationship, and it's with the new administration.
Okay, thanks. So just to kind of close up this part of the discussion, when you say sworn officers, are constables inputting budgetary information? And the follow-up to that would be, so, because I would ask is, why aren't sergeants doing it? Because sergeants are more of kind of they'll be offended by it, but they'll get over it, I hope. Some sergeants are on the road, like the shift guys. I appreciate that. I rode along with one on a ride along, but some sergeants I think are more head office based, so they're kind of taking that semi-staff role as well. Why aren't they doing that on behalf of their constables? So the question is this happening right at the constable level, or and if so, why isn't it brought up to their immediate direct reports?
Thank you. Through the chair, and I'll look to Bruce if I screw anything up, that he can give me a wave and he can correct. When KPMG used the term sworn officers, it could either be a sergeant or a constable. It's really on who's in control of the budget, whoever is assigned the budget. So normally they're slightly more senior officers that are assigned the budget. However, for officer expenses, if they're submitting expenses, that actual officer has to input his or her expenses into the system. So on a budget matter, it's who's ever responsible to the organization for that budget. They're the ones who are accessing the system. But there are cases where individual officers are submitting their personal expenses.
Okay, with no, and who approves that?
So it goes to their manager, whoever is overseeing that budget again.
Okay, thanks. And Chair, just the last question is regarding the chart on the bottom. Isn't the chart on the bottom a little bit misleading in the sense that Niagara Region's capital budget or whatever is like humongous? So when you do calculations of ratios, I could probably put another column in there like Niagara Region Planning, and I'm sure Niagara Region Planning would be closer to maybe NRPS. So what's the purpose of showing that? Because what it says to the first glance of an eye is that one FTE is responsible for almost 10 million at the region and only 2.5 million, but that's kind of the nature of the entire budgets. I don't think if that's supposed to be presented to us as a measure of efficiency, I think that's misleading. So my question is, what's the purpose of that chart, other than to tell us that we're supposedly more efficient than somehow the NRPS is? And if that's not the case, I'd like to hear that publicly. That's not what you're saying.
Through the chair, when you're looking at accounting support, this organization centralized all their accounting. Prior to my arriving here, there was separate financial reporting in each business unit. So public works had their own accountants, community services had their own accountants. So the only business unit, so when we consolidated that, what happens is you can actually process more transactions because you have more scale with fewer people and fewer dollars. The only business unit left, frankly, with their own finance, their own standalone finance unit is the NRP. One of the potential recommendations, it wasn't, sorry, I don't even want to use the term recommendation because KPMG said this was an option to address the concern. I don't want to say that they were recommending it, was to add more staff to the Niagara Regional Police to process. And what this shows is I would have difficulty making that as a recommendation, because if you were to look at how much it's costing to process those transactions, that amount, it's more than what we are, and I would rather add resources to a higher need than that. So that's the purpose of it. So whenever you have a situation where you could increase scale in a finance back office, you will always drive efficiency.
Okay, thanks. My last question, Chair, perhaps is directed back at the CAO, since he's having these meetings with the new chief, and there's a good tone to those. Does the CAO, or is the CAO willing to sit down with the chief and explore, notwithstanding comments made at the bottom of this page about what we're already inheriting is already costing us more and everything else, but is there an opportunity for us, just because of economies of scale or whatever it is, to take over some of the administrative functions of the police, that the chief would say, yeah, you know, this is rote work, this is something the region's doing every day on behalf of a whole bunch of itself and maybe on behalf of housing or whatever, I don't know. But it seems to me, and I was on the board, that they have a pretty healthy, which is a polite word, a healthy civilian staff component. Are there opportunities, or is the CO interested in talking with Chief McCullough, who is open, I think, to these kind of conversations, to cost sharing on, with the ultimate goal is to bring down the cost to our taxpayers?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Petrowski, I just simply say, yeah, there are opportunities and all options are there. We have to be respectful of our respective collective agreements that we both have. And, but yeah, there are opportunities for shared services. We already have some shared services, and so we're looking at other opportunities. Yes, thanks.
Okay, so just for the record then, is that actually on the table as a discussion point, or is it just a nice thing to maybe consider talking about?
Through the chair, I would say that we would consider it. It's not, for a variety of reasons, which was kind of outlined in the report. We're not looking at doing that immediately. But if there was impetus from the Niagara Regional Police Service side, we would certainly take a hard look at it.
All right, thanks. I'll make a comment. I respect the collective bargaining process, but I don't respect the fact that if there's opportunities saved in this day and age, that we won't have those challenges, and we have to look past those. But it sounds like the opportunities for those discussions might take place when my grandchildren are elected officials. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a couple of questions. This report is initiated by NRP.
Through the chair is a unique situation. It would through the chair was a unique situation. It was requested by the Niagara Regional Police Services Board. Niagara Region paid for the report and participated in the report. So it's kind of a joint effort, is what I would say.
No, I understand that, but I'm trying to question the separation of our police budget and all that that entails to anything that we do. I understand the shared services part of it, but I'm a little concerned that the region, I guess we've been asked, is what you're telling me, to get involved in their financial operations.
Through the chair, we always have supported NRP finances. Yeah, but
I know you support it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about getting quite involved in making some changes to it. At their request, you're telling me.
I'll answer the question is the police board had a motion for their staff to work with our staff to look for opportunities. I don't want to get into what was behind the thinking of the police board's motion, but we looked for opportunities for savings, and the report was produced, and it's before you. And if there's further requirements, either the police board can make that, or this council can ask for that to be made also.
But our role as regional councillors is to say yes or no to the budget that comes forward from the police services board.
Well, the Police Act says that the municipality has to provide appropriate administrative support, appropriate equipment and facilities, and appropriate financial resources for them to undertake their job.
Okay, and my last question is on the EFMS system, where we at the region or staff at the region have the ability to maneuver up to $1 million among accounts. Is that also true at NRP?
Through the chair, the police has their own finance bylaw. That's different. So it's a far different rules. The police budget, once you take away payroll,
oh, I know.
Is very small. So the $1 million would be like a quarter of their budget almost. So non-payroll. So they have much lower limits.
I wouldn't mind confirmation that they don't have to follow the same rule as.
No, they do not. They have their own rules that that their board approves.
So that being on television will be the record. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, there is a motion on the floor to receive. All in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you. Moving along to items for consideration, CST 66, that's proposed disposition of lands in the city of St. Catharines. And sorry, before I get a mover and seconder for that, I want to thank Mr. Peaver, who was here this morning, made himself available to answer questions on the back office review. Thank you. Is there a mover and seconder for the item? Moved by Councillor Height, seconded by Councillor Burrows. Thank you. Any questions or comments to this item? Councillor Pachowski.
Could, I apologize, could the commissioner, acting commissioner, I take it there's no value yet attached to any of this, correct? So what's the next step, basically?
Through the chair, there is a value. The value is for the one parcel, parcel A, it's page 3 of the report, but parcel A is about $132,000 an acre. Parcel B was valued at $247,000 an acre, and parcel C was valued at $251,000 an acre. That was done, though we are doing a little bit more due diligence on those properties to see if there's any. Every appraisal has a number of limitations and restrictions in it, and we're doing a little bit of due diligence to investigate whether there's anything that might impair the value of those properties. But that's the initial valuations.
Okay, thanks. We're into the third year of this term already. What happened? Is there any one of these in particular that we had a reason to have this long, or why is it now? Is it just a overload of work in the office? Because it seems to me, well, I'll let you answer the question.
Thank you. Through the chair, when I first got to the region about 3 years ago, surplus properties was handed to me. We had looked at all our properties. This one was still under the control of Public Works. There was still potential requirements for it for use as a wastewater water facility. We had put a request into Public Works probably about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, to review it. They undertook a review. There was some staffing issues in water and wastewater at the time, and that review got delayed a bit. But then they came back earlier this year and said, no, we do no longer need it for our wastewater master plan, and asked us to, and then essentially took their interest out of that property.
Okay, thanks. So I hope, after hearing that question, the CAO takes it under advisement that perhaps he can lodge himself in between situations where there's a shortage of resources, because that doesn't seem to be an adequate or sufficient response for our taxpayers. Secondly, what's going to happen to the money? What account does it go into? And third, how many more of these will be coming flushed out in the next year or next term? It seems to me you don't know what you don't know, because it's not, you don't have access to it until it's surplus. How many more are in purgatory like this? Or is there, as corporate services put it on themselves, Chair, to not bring forward any more of these unless something, had a use, it had a building on it and whatever?
Thank you. Through the chair, what we do in the real estate team, and what we have done, is we reviewed all our real estate holdings to see if there's anything with vacant land on it. And then we asked the departments that's in control of that property what their intended uses are. And we monitor that. So we're continually monitoring our surplus properties, and if you look over the last 3 years, we've probably had more sales in surplus properties than I would say in prior councils. We've really thinned out our surplus properties. The one thing I would say is that we do have a lot of surplus properties, but unfortunately they're not very sellable. They're little strips of land left behind from road things, and we try to, if we can accommodate a neighbor who's already mowing it and that kind of stuff, we try to make those deals off to the side to review them. So there will be a continual flow of surplus properties that we will try to remove, and that's our process. We look at all our land holdings on kind of an annual basis and try to work through that list to see what we can diminish. So I will guarantee you that there will be more surplus properties coming through next year as we try to take our interest out of them.
Okay, in regards to the question, where's the money go?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So the money goes back to the surplus property account through to our capital reserve account.
Okay, well, I'll end on this. That's a good answer, but knowing, for example, a specific situation when we use as a reason, I almost said the word excuse, uses the word a reason, vestige pieces of property. We had a gentleman who came forward in the advertising business under the unsolicited proposal policy that I helped champion in the last term, and make a pitch to us that he would pay us revenue, committee should know this, to rent the property if he could put billboards or certain advertising on it. He actually went as far as saying, and I'll even give you some region advertising on an electronic board, and yet this property is still sitting there being mowed by somebody. So quite frankly, that's not really a complete answer. And the answer I think I'll get back from staff is, well, we don't have time to do something with it. But this project, I think, was brought to our attention at least 2 years ago, maybe longer. And maybe the CAO could do something to help dislodge any of the staff resources, impediments or obstacles to it. But quite frankly, we have a missed revenue opportunity. We have a person who had a proactive, and he's told, by the way, well, we're going to have to tender that now after he did all the work, which is great on these little minuscule pieces of property. It's not really, it should have come to our attention. We should have been able to say, no, let's do it. Unsolicited proposal policy falls within the parameters. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the way we handle surplus property based on that. And we're missing revenue every day because that could have been put to bed. But hey, what's missed revenue? Maybe somebody wants to respond to it or not, but the fact is that we're missing revenue every month on this.
Thank you, Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just regarding number 3 here, the council approved that staff undertake a divestiture approach to the public that considers factors other than price. I did look at the bylaw, and I thank staff for providing that. And I think the report alludes to section 21 of the bylaw, which says all surplus land shall be at market value unless otherwise set out in this bylaw or otherwise directed and approved by regional council. So is that kind of the rationale providing the rationale under section 21 to say there may be opportunities for this particular property that's more than price, that it could be economic development factors, employment, investment.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct, and that was why there was a specific ask in that. There is concern that this is one of the last pieces of employment land that St. Catharines owns, and I think they want it to be used for employment purposes. I think it's an opportunity for us to test whether we can RFP out the piece of property with an economic investment angle to it versus just a price angle. And council, through the first report on the first 10.75 acres, made that very clear in their decision to take a deal or to look for a deal for employment and economic purposes. So we're just essentially extending that theme to the rest of the property.
Okay, thank you. I know when the town has done some property transactions, we do so with, and I think it's our bylaw that talks about within the public interest. When this comes back to us, can we consider using language about within the public interest? I mean, economic development obviously is important, et cetera. And I guess we're only doing that because it is within the public interest. I don't know if staff have a comment on that, Mr. Chair, or whether that's in the municipal act. I guess there's always the worry of bonusing a specific business. So how do you balance the bonusing versus economic development and something that's within the public interest, I guess, is the question that we have to answer. And I think, you know, the report alludes to us looking at that in a specific way in a different report. I guess I'm just looking for how we're going to answer that question. Is it in the public interest or is it bonusing?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Through the chair, the best way to answer that question is through an open RFP process where everyone can bid, because then you don't get into the issue of bonusing. And if we have clear criteria, so in this case we might say, listen, we're going to evaluate your bid based upon, we're going to give X number of points for employment, X number of points for investment, and X number of points for what you're paying us. And if it's done in a clear thing and anybody was able to submit a bid to it, then you don't have the question of bonusing, and the public interest, quote unquote, is determined frankly by your scoring mechanism, is how you would place it.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I agree. Is that what we're doing in this case?
Through the chair, yes, that allows us to enter into a divestiture approach to the public that considers other factors. So we'll score other factors. We're going to work with the City of St. Catharines' economic development team there, our economic development team and planning to come up with a scoring mechanism. Then the real estate folks and procurement folks will undertake the public process to receive bids on that. All the bids would have to come back to council for final, well, this committee and council for final approval.
That's helpful, because when I read that divestiture approach, I didn't get that this was going to be, it says now divestiture approach, sorry, to the public. I didn't understand that was going to be a scoring mechanism. I thought it was going to be, you know, there might be a potential for a sole source or somebody coming in after this meeting and saying, hey, I love that property, I want to buy it. So what we're saying is this is actually going to turn into a public process.
Sorry, through the chair, yeah, I guess maybe that's us with our inside baseball terms. A divestiture approach is a public RFP. We're a little unclear whether we're going to do an RFPQ first to pre-qualify investors and then do kind of an RFP approach. We want to work that through with City of St. Catharines and our economic development folks to develop the defined approach. But the whole intent is that it will be a public facing process. And it will most likely be an RFP, to be fair.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if this is friendly or not, a friendly amendment. Can we add that to the resolution, something like staff undertake a divestiture approach to the public in brackets like an RFP or RFQ, close bracket, because then I think that would provide greater certainty in what the heck we mean by divestiture approach to the public.
Yeah, I think that's fair, if the clerks have captured
That's helpful.
that.
I think,
Can I just make a friendly suggestion to
Yeah,
that?
of
If we
course.
just put RFX approach, that is the term, so then it doesn't matter if it's a P, a Q, a T, it doesn't matter, it's just a public approach.
okay,
It's easy for the clerks. I'll help the clerk.
okay. I'd appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I think it helps clarify it for the public. There could have been a sole source on this or whatever, but now there's a public process, which I think will be heartening to the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. CAO?
Thank you, Chair. I also want to advise committee that I want to formally disclose to you, our current tenant is not supportive of the divestiture. So we currently have a tenant agreement. We have an agreement with a tenant who is farming the land and is not in agreement. We've also been approached on a purchase of the land that wouldn't go through the RFX. If you want to hear more about that, it'd have to be in camera.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Sorry, would not go through the RFX or would go through? I didn't hear what the CO said.
Through Chair, thank you, Councillor Augustine. It would be not going through the RFX process. We've been approached on an interest on the property that I can give you the details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I understood from earlier comments that it would go through the RFX, so I'm confused on that. But I guess it's because of the timing of that approval or that consideration, is that correct?
So if I may, this friendly amendment would ensure everything has to go through that process.
Correct. Thank you, Chair. Your approval of this recommendation would then, we would put it through an RFX and then anybody can bid on it. However, we've been approached from a party who wants to negotiate with us.
Okay.
And so their ask is not to go through the RFX process, and you as council can waive that and direct the staff to go straight into negotiations.
Okay, I look forward to hearing from colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Campion.
Thanks. My question's been asked and answered. Thanks.
Councillor Timms.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little concerned about on-the-fly modification of item 3. I'm not sure what that effect will have on current opportunities on that property, and I want to be sure that adding this friendly, and this may be in camera subject, does not impede the progress we've made on this property. Does this in any way affect the current discussions on this property?
If I may, I think it's a decision of committee if they want to ensure any and all interested parties go through this process or allow staff to negotiate with an individual or a sole company. Right now, this amendment says they all should go through the same process unless it's waived.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned about and do not wish to vote in favor of or have this considered as friendly. I know this project has been, or this discussion's been underway for a number of months now, and I'm concerned that any on-the-fly type modifications to the recommendations might jeopardize that. So I will ask that this not be considered friendly and that we vote on this amendment.
Councillor, how about if we refer this to in camera and then continue the discussion there? Okay. Will you move that? Councillor Burrows, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Timms. Refer this item to in camera later this morning. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. CSD 69, Affordable Housing Municipal Capital Facility Report. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Volpatti, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Nunziata. Questions or comments to this item? Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just getting it up on my screen here. I just wanted to speak to the one point in the report. I'm supportive of the process, but I'm just trying to leverage it a little bit more for us. And I just wanted to, well, actually, I have a question to staff first. Of the 20 units that are supported through Niagara Regional Housing, are those individuals going to be coming off our waiting list?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, as was explained when this report originally went to council, those 20 units, there would be assistance provided, but generally, and Mr. Troke is here, he would be in a better position to speak to this, so if I'm going way off base, maybe he can give me the evil eye. But the subsidy would assist 20 families. However, generally those on the waiting list are those where their rent geared to income should be no more than 30% of their household income. So the subsidy may not be deep enough to actually tie it to that rent geared to income amount. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, and it's not a certainty that that amount of subsidy would get all of those 20 occupants off the wait list.
Okay, thanks for that answer. So then my supplementary question then is, if we converted the 20 into rent geared income, then we'd definitely be taking people off our list. And in the report, it says there's an additional $65,000 that would cost us to do that. So I'd like to put an amendment forward that, and my amendment would read that the Region of Niagara contributes $65,000 to this project to ensure that 20 units become available for rent geared to income.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just hearing from staff, there's a budget implication that adding that should go through the budget process.
Well, if you want to put that as an amendment that it needs to be approved through the budget process, I'm happy with that. But we need to have some discussion about that, because if we're going to do things creatively, let's maximize the benefit, not just do it and say, okay, that's it. Because I know I did talk to Mr. Troke, there isn't any funding available through NRH in that category to meet that need, but here's an opportunity to actually attack a waiting list as opposed to just subsidizing some housing. And that's what we talk about here at Regional Council, is getting that waiting list down. Here's an opportunity. I think $65,000 to do that is a good opportunity to move forward on that. So if you want it amended that it needs budget approval, I have no issue with that.
Thank you, Councillor. Can you just highlight once more your amendment so that we capture it accurately?
Okay, that the Region of Niagara contributes $65,000 to this project to ensure that 20 units become available as rent geared to income pending budget approval.
Thank you, Councillor. The only technicality might be, okay, the only technicality may be it has to be budgeted through the NRH budget. So because they are the ones that budget for the subsidy, the Niagara region doesn't budget for the subsidy. So,
but I don't want, Mr. Chair, on that. I'm not. We've sent them a directive to meet guidance. If they come back as guidance, this is an additional project. I don't think it should fall under their guidance, and I think council should support putting that money towards here. We could have that discussion at budget time. I don't have a problem with that. But I think if you want to do things creatively, let's start looking at maximizing the dollars that we're spending creatively.
seconded by Chair Caslin, the amendment. Okay, so there's an amendment on the floor. We'll take speakers to the amendment only at this point. Any other questions or comments to the amendment? Oh, sorry, it'll have to be annually. Yeah. Councillor Petrowski to the amendment.
Can somebody explain, Chair, why this is an annual item?
Thank you, through the chair. The subsidy would be required every year for the individuals to meet the rent requirement. So what this would do is lower or increase the subsidy so that the person is only paying 30% of their income to rent. So every year they would require that.
So just to back up then, isn't there another financial contribution we're making here? Isn't there any other capital incentives or benefits, thanks, that we're doing?
We're making financial contribution through the waiver of property tax and
Right.
through the waiver of development charges.
Right, what's the dollar value of that?
The dollar value is about $1 million in development charges and about $60,000 a year, or sorry, $140,000 a year in property taxes.
That's per year.
For the property taxes, that is per year, that's correct.
Okay, so, and we can wax beautiful about low-income housing and everything we want to do, and those are great things to do, especially in election years. But what I'm concerned about, regardless of what the final use of the money is, although the low-income thing always has more gravitas, why are we budgeting on the fly right now? Okay, like I got a real problem with this. I got a problem with this whole agenda being a to be distributed, and that's why I'm going back and forth to clerk's office getting some other copies, which is in and of itself not acceptable. Why are we budgeting on the fly right now?
Counselor,
Where's
so
the,
if
so
Counselor,
the specific question is,
let me answer your question. That's why it says subject to budget approval.
I get
You've
it.
addressed it right out of the gate.
No, but where did the councillor get the 65,000 from? Why isn't this something staff's bringing forward? Why does it have to be something we're bringing forward?
It is mentioned in the report.
I get, but why didn't it form staff's recommendation?
Through the chair, when the report came forward, the request was made to provide the dollar value required to make these units rank geared to income units. We brought that information forward, knowing that there were constraints with respect to budget guidance. It has not been a recommendation in the housing budget and has not been a recommendation in the region's budget.
Okay, well then I hope somebody refers it back to housing. This is not the proper way to be spending money on the fly like this. I'm not saying that I'm against it, I'm against the process. And when we're standing up and complaining about all sorts of other things, and we're going to be looking at the expense policy next and everything, budgeting on the fly, 65,000 here, it sounds obviously like some people already thought. I would like to hear from the proponent, for example. Why haven't we got a presentation from the proponent asking us for this? Why are we volunteering it? We're all of a sudden, you know, like the Robin Hood here. So I don't understand, Chair. Maybe someone could ask why, I'll ask it this way. Does staff support this recommendation, Chair?
Through the chair, staff is only recommendation that it gets put through the budget process like any other request, and that's been addressed by this amendment. So it's up to council to decide where they want to spend their money.
Okay, well, I'm not supporting it. I don't mind saying I'm not supporting it. That doesn't mean I'm not supporting the project. I'm not supporting it because it's parachuted in here. It's wrong. This should be, first of all, this should have a discussion at housing. Housing can say, we'd like the region to pay for it. But let's have the proper communications instead of parachuted numbers. This seems like an ambush, and I'm not supporting an ambush. Thank you, Chair. And I'll ask for a recorded vote, and I don't mind putting my hand up saying I'm not supporting being ambushed by these things, because this is an ambush. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Timms to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to understand the amendment. If without this amendment, the $65,000 annually would go through our social housing arm, which is the Niagara Regional Housing. That's where it would stay, and would be would come with the regional housing budget. Would come saying that the specific line, $65,000 annually for this project. And we would flow it through where I think all of our other social housing or subsidized housing goes through is Niagara Regional Housing budget. I don't think the region, and I'd ask that question, I guess. Does the region have any other budget line for social housing independent of the Niagara Regional Housing budget?
Through the chair, I would say, Councillor Timms, on first blush, if this was to happen, you're correct. What all the region would do would fund Niagara Regional Housing $65,000 with an asterisk beside that funding saying it must be used for this purpose, because Niagara Regional Housing has a very large budget that they control for these subsidies, and they would be the ones administering it. So we wouldn't administer a separate pot separately.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. not going to support the amendment because I think it creates a separate new line, new column for the region outside of our regional housing. I'd be quite pleased to support adding the $65,000 to the Niagara Regional Housing budget, specifically identified for this purpose, but I don't like to see another separate line created outside of that envelope. The regional housing group does administer, I think, our social housing very well, and it stays within that envelope. That's where I'd like to see this. So I'm not going to support the amendment on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Volpatti.
For exactly the same reasons, I'm not going to support the amendment either.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Okay, Chair Caslin.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to this yet. Perhaps to allay some of the concerns that I'm hearing around the horseshoe, I'd like to refer this to staff to get their input on what the proper process might be, whether it be what's being recommended here on the screen or something different to accommodate the concerns that are being put forward. Just the amendment.
So thank you, just getting some logistical clarity. One moment, Councillor. Okay, so it's to refer the amendment. We'll go back to the main motion. What are you referring? You're referring this to staff for when, for it to come back?
Yep, so I'll ask for staff's opinion as to when they might have that prepared. Through the chair, I think the referral, Mr. Choke's in the audience, so I think the referral go both ways. There would be referral to NRH staff and to regional staff, and we'll bring it back through the ABC or levy budget process. Thank you, and I do see these two items, 1 and 2, being distinctly separate, so I think the amendment would be easily accommodated.
Okay, thank you. So referred to both NRH staff and regional staff. Seconded by Councillor Petrowski. All in favor of the referral? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Back to the main motion. I know we had a speakers list there. Councillor D'Angelo, you still have the floor.
No, Mr. Chair, my amendment that's been referred deals with the issue that I was concerned about. I support the rest of the report as it's written here. And again, I look forward to our budget discussions. These concerns that were addressed regarding the amendment will be cleared out, and we'll be able to move forward at that time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm in full support of the project. I think it's a mechanism by which we as regional council, because we are responsible to provide social and public housing in the region. So it gives us a mechanism by which we can forgive development, forgive might not be the right word, but forgive development charges and property taxes on projects where we really need these units in our housing stock. And I've had many calls from people who are concerned about our DCs, the new DC bylaw, because it increases development charges on rental projects. But this is a way by which those who are really interested in providing social housing can have their cake and eat it too. They can have their private rental units on which they are going to make considerable money, but we also get units by which we can solve our housing problem in Niagara. So those people who are saying that our development charge bylaw is a hindrance to developing rental units are absolutely wrong. And I just want to get that message out there. My only question about this development and others like it, because I see this as a prototype, not a pilot, but a prototype, so that we can go ahead and build projects like this throughout the region. My only question is, how do we as a region now control where these projects are going to go? because we have needs in many communities. And I don't see that as being an issue where we're going to stop this development. I'm just saying that going forward, how are we going to control where the new developments are going to go if we continue to forgive DCs and forgive property taxes on developments which meet our specifications?
Great
So
question.
that
Thank
remains
you,
a very
Councillor.
large question for me.
For sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Thank you. Through the chair, it's a large question, but a good question. All this bylaw does is allow for the next step in the process to happen. And in the next step, the RFP process will have a number of controls to ensure that we're only building product A that we can afford and B that we want. So the controls would be the proponent would have to enter into an agreement with Niagara Regional Housing. So Niagara Regional Housing will be one of the agencies that determines whether it's needed or not. The agreements would have to be also agreed to by the local area municipalities. So again, the local area municipalities would also have to agree whether they want to exempt their portion of the property taxes and have a property, that type of investment in social housing in their local community. And the region itself would also have to enter into an agreement with this. So there's a number of checks and balances to ensure that this council is getting product that is worth the investment in lost revenue.
Right, and I'm really satisfied with that and comforted by the fact that we have something in place that will address my concerns.
Sorry, so through the chair, that RFP report will be coming probably in at the end of next month of how we're going to go approach the public, but it will contain all that in that RFP. But this bylaw is required first for us to have any agreement in place.
I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Petruski?
Thanks, Chair. So are we looking at this in terms, as far as the DC side, against the old bylaw, right? Because we haven't passed a new one. And then the follow-up to this is kind of piggybacking on Councillor Valpatti's comments. How does this not fit into a pick and choose situation? So we're picking and choosing one project and someone else may come forward and we just, because we might not like the developer behind it, or some people here may not like the developer behind it, we're going to say no, regardless of what banner it wraps itself around, in this case, housing. Is this pick and choose? I just want on the record. Are we picking and choosing here?
Through the chair, I think that would be the debate for the report when it comes through on the RFP process, whether it's a pre-qualification RFP. But in any RFP process, you run the process, you score it in a particular manner. And it's not a pick and choose, it's whoever has the highest points is who you're obligated to pick. But there has to be a public process, and there also has to be financial support from NRH and from the region on these. So we'll run the process, but there's still budgetary implications that have to be approved both by the local area municipality, the region, and by NRH.
But what I meant is pick and choose, because I'm already seeing the name of an organization, in this case, Pantera here.
Sorry, in this case, this was one that was specifically approved by council.
Right.
So it was an unsolicited proposal that came to council. Council did pick this one from the unsolicited proposal. As part of selecting Pantera, under the requirement of the unsolicited proposal, we're going now to run a RFP process. So sorry for misunderstanding your question. In this one case, council made a direct decision on this investment only.
Okay, I'm confused though, Chair, because I don't understand that answer completely. What I'm getting at is this, and we don't have I don't know why we don't have a delegation presentation, so maybe, it seems to me, unless I'm missing something here, it seems to me this is still pick and choose because we're being asked to waive $1 million worth of DCs and an annual amount of property taxes for a specific project. And of course, that's what makes this kind of thing easier for some people probably to put up their hands. But what I'm getting at is, why isn't our functions and systems already codified that this even has to come in front of us now? I mean, I've been here 7 years. I don't get this still.
Okay,
We were having these
let's get a-
discussions about Tabor
Counselor,
Manor
let's
at the
get a
beginning of
response,
last
please.
term, and this seems like another
Counselor,
Tabor Manor.
okay, let's get a response.
Sorry, through the chair, the decision to waive the property tax and development charges was made previously by this council. So that was already, so the presentation by Bethlehem and the
Right.
proponents were already made, council already agreed to it. What's before you today, part of that council decision, part of that recommendation was staff had to go away and adjust the bylaw, the affordable housing bylaw, to accommodate the deal that council had already approved. All that's before you today is the changes to the bylaw to accommodate what what council has already approved on this. So the whole selection process, the financial considerations were all done as part of a previous report and a previous decision by council. All that's before you today is legal counsel went away and changed the bylaw and updated the bylaw, frankly, to accommodate this new platform.
All right, so, and the last question then, regarding that, when that decision's made, that was not pick and choose either then, that was codified, it already fell out of the way we're doing property taxes and the way we're doing DCs? Because because of the nature of this project?
Because of the nature of the request, it required council decision, and it went direct to council, and council made that decision. So that process was, because there was no RFP out on the street, it was an unsolicited proposal, staff brought it to committee and to council originally. The first time it came to us, committee requested further information. The further information was brought back, and council made a decision at that time to approve it.
Thank you.
It also went through NRH Housing Board as well. Councillor Height?
Yes, I was going to speak about the amendment that was brought forward. That's when I pushed the button. So
Okay.
I'm in favor of this. I assumed, I was surprised we saw this. I thought we'd already gone through the process. Now, the commissioners explained this is more of a rubber stamp. We've got to do the paperwork. Here it is. Let's just get on with it and hope it's built tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Councillor Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the recommendation and thank staff for following through with the paperwork in order to facilitate this through the bylaw changes that are suggested, and hope council will support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Caslin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We said we were going to do business differently, and this is part of that. This is an example of what we're trying to do here. Looking at different ways to get our waiting list for affordable housing down, and this is one of the ways that we are working together hand in hand with a financial institution, a Bethlehem Place, and also a private developer to establish a template of what can be done to address the affordable housing issue in Niagara. This is a good example of what we can use moving forward to address other concerns in other municipalities within Niagara for others to follow and lay out that template so that it can be easily bid on, easily addressed, and perhaps we get more affordable housing built in Niagara than we ever have in the past. So I do support what's on the in front of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. You know, I want to echo some of the comments around the table that I think this is certainly a very valuable project, and it will help alleviate some members on the waiting list and help families. I do have some questions now that we're into specifics, because I want to make sure that we do this properly. So I'm a bit confused because it says here that there's going to be a total of 127 units to be constructed, yet then there's reference in the next bullet line on page 3 that there's 26 to 31 units will be 80% of modified, blah, 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 all these other things. So I guess my general question is, how many of those units will be considered affordable housing? Is it the 26 to 31, or is it all the 127?
Just looking up that information for you, Councillor.
Yeah,
I'll start the answer and then
top of page 3.
Yeah, so the 127 is the total building unit. Of that, 26 to 31 units will be 80% of the modified market rent. So that's, CMHC comes out with a market rent that says in St. Catharines, a single unit
Yeah.
rent is 900 and some odd dollars. For affordability guidelines, we move that down to 80%, so 20% discount off of that. NRH has a different definition of affordability, and that's from only 30% of your income should be put to rent. But the 80% is off of the market rent to get to what we would consider affordable housing. But I don't know if the
So
director.
my general question is, because there's reference to these 30 units, you know, the third bullet point there says, remaining units will be at the CMHC average market rent resulting in the entire building on average. I just wondered, like, what does that mean?
Oh.
Are all the units affordable housing or just those 26 to 31?
No, so of the 127, so if I just pick a number so the math's easy, let's say 27 units
Yeah.
are going to be at the 80% level. The other 100 would then be at the CMHC market rent, which when you talk to certain developers, oh, I'm getting a head shake, no. Or they're going to try to, the requirement is that they are at that. They may have it at lower rent than that. But the requirement from our point of view is we just require 26%, 26 or 27 of those units to be at that 80% mark, and the rest to be at CMHC guideline. But Helen or Director Chamberlain?
Through the chair. With respect to just some additional information on clarification of those 26 to 31 units. So based on the original report, there were 20 units that NRH would be able to support with subsidy to get them down from 96% of the modified average rent to 80. In addition to those 20 units, there were 26 to 31 that would automatically be at 80 as part of the business model that was put together. So in total, there would be approximately 46 to 51 units that would be affordable, but only 20 that NRH would be assisting and facilitating to get to that affordable rent.
Okay, so 50 units, we'll say rounding, will be affordable?
That's correct.
Okay. I guess that's, I didn't think it was that high, which is good that it's that high, but because the report just talks about 26 to 31. So my question is, under the regulation, Section 7(1)B of the regulation says that a municipality may list it as a capital municipal facility if all of the units fall within the definition of affordable housing. So I just want to make sure that we're adhering to the law on this.
Yeah, started in this one.
That's Section 7(1)B
It's Sterling.
of the regulation.
Director?
And through you, Chair. All of the units will be affordable housing, but affordable housing in the bylaw, both historically in 2004 and in the current version, is CMHC market rents, average market rents. So they're all affordable as defined. However, for our IAH funding, for example, in many of our buildings, we use 80% of affordable as the guideline for the receipt of monies, of which there will be 21 or 26 to 31 in that reduced category.
That's great, great news. So I'm pleased and very, very supportive of this. I appreciate answering the questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mapes.
I've had this argument with a municipal CAO in the past. A municipal capital facility does not have to be owned, and this building will be owned by Pantera Groups exclusively. So a municipal capital facility does not have to be owned by a public body. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I don't know if legal has any other comment on that.
Through you, Chair, that is correct. And under our old bylaw, it required ownership. This bylaw has been amended to allow for ownership and or leasing for the purposes of affordable housing. So it is permitted.
And the only act that can make a privately owned facility a municipal capital facility. The only act is we need to pass a motion to deem it to be. That's it.
Through you, Chair. Once an agreement is finalized, a further bylaw specific to this property will have to be passed, designating it as a municipal capital facility.
And does the municipality, in order to get the reductions, I'm assuming the municipality where the municipal capital facility is located also has to pass such a bylaw?
The local municipality?
Technically, they don't, but one of the requirements in our draft agreement and one of the guidelines is that the city consents officially to this process so that we're not imposing that obligation on them.
So if the city did not consent, what would happen with the city portion of development charges and taxes?
I don't believe the statute permits the distinction between the two. You are either freed of the taxes or you're not. I presume we would bring that back to council with the information that the city didn't agree. And in this particular case, my understanding is the city of St. Catharines is in agreement. But if that were the case, we'd have to bring that back and a decision made as to whether or not council wanted to impose essentially a loss of tax on one of the local municipalities.
Okay, so that is my question. My question is does the deeming of a facility as a municipal capital facility rest with the regional government at the end of the day? Or does it have to be approved ultimately by both? And I also want to know what happens to the school tax portion of this.
That's my understanding of what the statute and the right of the region to do, yes.
Okay,
again, not what we intend to do.
And so if we deem it to be a municipal capital facility, the municipal taxes and DCs are also forgiven. What about the school board?
My understanding is the school board is affected. They'll lose their taxes as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor DeDaddy.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to speak in favor. I think it's pretty obvious we've got a crisis on our hands. We've got a lot of homeless people here in the community. And although, yes, some might see this as a loss of revenue, and that's understandable, but this is a necessary part of what we do. We provide services that don't always pay for themselves. I mean, in the same way in a municipality, you know, we subsidize sports, hockey, arenas, ballparks, et cetera, and in this case, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we provide affordable housing. And if this is the business model that'll attract investment so that we can build it, we have to do it. I mean, I can tell you we've got concerns right now in Niagara Falls with our motels overflowing, and we've got a lot of commercial concerns in districts where really it's not the most appropriate place for them to be, but we have to give them some place. And I think this is where we got to bite the bullet, and this is part of our responsibility. So I just want to speak very much in favor.
Great, thank you. Councilor Campion?
Thanks. I didn't understand the answer to one of Councilor Maeve's questions. So maybe I'll restate it. If all of this happens, is the result, a possible result, that the the region could impose a tax waiver on the local area municipality without their consent?
Director?
Through you, Chair, that's correct. It's a possibility that could happen.
So because of that, I can't support this because I don't know what my council or my staff feels about that concept. And so I think we're going down kind of a road that's very dangerous initially because we need to have that consultation before we can all agree that this would be a good idea. I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, and I'm sure that it's not the intention of the region to force a municipality into this. However, the possibility exists. So I would have difficulty with that, but it looks like our solicitor has a comment.
Through you, Chair. There's already a bylaw in place and has been since 2004 that gave that, that power. What this bylaw is doing is updating it to reflect the fact that various provincial statutes have changed. It updates wording that I considered to be vague. For example, it had an interest rate section with no basis for how you calculate it. But essentially that law exists and has for, and rule has existed for 20 years. I'm sorry, 12 years. In addition, there's a second bylaw in each case for each particular property. So there would be a debate. If there was a property in Welland involved, there would be a debate on that property. This is providing a structure for that debate.
CAO.
And thank you, Chair, and to committee. When this issue first arose, we were receiving supportive commentary from the City of Niagara Falls staff, City of Welland staff, and the City of St. Catharines staff.
Great, thanks. Seeing no other speakers, I just want to add my comments as well, just congratulating those involved. The partnerships that are here, I think it'll be a great entrepreneurial model moving forward. Both the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and then the government sector as well. So kudos to everyone involved. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? If recorded vote has been requested, look to the clerk to open the vote when ready. How are you voting, Councillor? We'll capture yours as well, Councillor Nunziata. Thank you. Thank you, committee members. So it's about 11 o'clock now. We've got still substantive items to deal with that are more time sensitive than others. My recommendation is that we move to the DC bylaw discussion and insurance prior to the councillor expenses. We do have a councillor expense policy. That one's not timely. The DCs and insurance are the timely items. So with committee's indulgence, we could move directly to the DC one first. Seeing that's fine, okay. So moving to CSE C27, that's consideration of the referred motion respecting the regional development charges and the proposed bylaw. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Volpatti, thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Height, thanks. Any speakers to this item? Councillor Campion.
Thanks, Chair. You know, I guess I'm not going to go into a long comment here because I think everybody that's here should recognize what my position is on this and what the City of Welland's position is on this. And certainly I believe that Fort Erie to a degree agrees with a lot of our position through discussions with them, as well as the Mayor of St. Catharines. What I would prefer to have happen, as I mentioned before and it got deferred, but would be that we would vote this down, bring back the original bylaw, which is, I forget what the number is, bylaw 62-2012, because that's a bylaw that was working and it saw a lot of development, and it's a great incentive for development, multi-res development, as well as industrial and brownfield development in our communities and within the region. So I just want to give you a couple of examples. I don't know if we've presented these before or not, but you know, we've got a lot of industrial development going on in the Niagara region. I think you can attribute a lot of that to our CIP programs, our gateway incentive programs, and of course our DC waivers. So as an example, Northern Gold in Welland, which is expanding again, so it's a new, fairly new business that is now in the process of building an expansion on that, so they're kind of a phase 1 and phase 2. So we've calculated that the DCs on that for the region would have been $895,950 if we go this way. It's an investment of over $44 million. It's creating multiple jobs, and it's keeping a business in our municipality. I bring this example forward because it is clear to us, very, very clear to us, through discussions, and it should be clear to the region, because they've had discussions with Northern Gold as well, that this would not be happening if we didn't have the DC waiver. They would be going somewhere else. They were going to go somewhere else, and because of our discussions with them and because of our incentive programs, they decided to stay here. The same thing is applicable for Devron, which is another development that's going on the 140. These things would not happen if, and they've stated this publicly, if the DCs were in place and we didn't have our other incentive programs. So that's just an example of the amount of investment. You know, I know you're all tired of hearing about GE, but we're of course very excited about it. But you know, they've got about $160 million of investment to $200 million investment just in construction right now. So that's $200 million, I'm sorry, of investment that's happening as we speak. There are people, hundreds of people on that job site working, spending money, et cetera, et cetera. So again, when we look at what do we get out of some of these changes, it can drive these businesses away, and likely would. So what I would suggest is that if we go back to the original bylaw, we in the city of Welland don't have a big problem with the fees that are associated with single family and townhouse development, or single residential and townhouse development. You know, we understand that that's a growth area for across the region, particularly in South Niagara as well as West Niagara. And that probably represents the bulk of where the development charges are being collected. So, you know, we don't like it. We don't think the developers really like it, but they're willing to accept those numbers. So, you know, if that's what it takes, I'd be happy to have that as amendment to the previous bylaw. So we passed the previous bylaw, made that change in it. I think that would be workable. We need 5 more years. That's the bottom line. We've had 5 years, we need 5 more years. It's just starting to work. People are comfortable with it. It's fairly easy to understand. And as I say, it's a workable, it's a proven tool that we have. And so why would we change that? We've got a perfect opportunity right now to say, let's give it 5 more years. You want to grab some money on the single family, the single residential, and the townhouse? That's fine, and that should generate enough revenue.
You know, Chair, on a point of order here, grab is not a good word to use in the way that we tax people. We
Okay,
don't do
Councillor,
grabs.
if I may, I don't recognize that as a point of order. Thank you. Councillor Campion, go ahead.
Thank you. I would probably consider it to be a point of privilege, but and I wouldn't accept that either. The word grab, if you're offended by that, it's just the equivalent of taking. So, but that's the point. Is if you want to take more money, that's a good place to get it. We're willing to go for that. So I'm hoping that, as I said, I don't want to go into all the reasoning that we've gone through before. I think we need to make a decision today to say that we are open for development. You're going to hear from staff that, we've addressed all those issues that Campion's bringing forward. Well, if you have, I don't really see it. And secondly, if it has, what's the difference? Why are you changing the old bylaw anyway? So we can live with it for another 5 years. It makes sense. I would urge this committee to send that strong message back to council that this is the right thing to do for the right reasons, and you can still utilize some of the money that you're going to gather there. And if it's a problem with, well, where's the money going to come from, or we need that money, I think we need to review our future growth plans and look at our capital expenditures in that plan. And do we need to do all these things in the next 5 years? What's the implication of delaying some of the collection of those funds for 5 years as it relates to the loss of potential development, loss of potential investment in our region? So I'll leave it with that. I'm hoping that I will get enough support to bring that forward.
I think Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to staff, first of all, and I'm reading through the report. What is our current industrial rate in the current 2012 bylaw on a square footage basis?
Just getting that information for you, Councillor.
Thank you. So the one that's in effect today is $4.43 per square foot.
Sorry, when you say in effect today, because we did pass this development charge
in July.
In July. So the one that was just passed now is
$4.43.
And the one previous, the one that replaced that one.
That was $5.16.
So I guess I'm having a bit of trouble understanding the concern about the new development charge bylaw versus the previous charge bylaws with respect to industrial development charges if we're actually reducing the development charge for industrial things. So I would just further that to say nothing in the development charges changes our policy with respect to waiving development charges for industrial applications. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, and since we've reduced the rate, by waiving the rate, it saves us that much more money on that program. We can actually waive more development charges within the same budget.
Yes, that's the math, yep.
So my concern is that the concerns that are being raised by Welland are not actually accurate in terms of passing this development charges bylaw. We are actually reducing the industrial development charges rate on a square footage basis. We are actually allowing for the development charges to continue to be waived, and by reducing the rate, we actually don't have to put as much money, or we can waive even more development charges within the same budget envelope. Is that accurate?
Look to the CAO.
That would be accurate, and I would, the references or the examples provided from Mayor Campion are gateway incentive programs. I'd like the director to explain that.
So I can answer your question as well. There was a slide that was presented with the $1,050,000. We were able to afford approximately 193,000 square feet of industrial grants. With the lower rate, that goes up to about 237,000 square feet of industrial space.
And this council hasn't been shy about increasing that budget if the applications are there, right, so far?
We've not approved an application that was in excess of the grant without having to come to council, and that's been funded through the yearly surplus or through the reserves, whichever would be required. But further to the CAO's point, the particular incentive programs that were referenced, being the Northern Gold and the GE and some others, those were gateway DC incentives, which are not included in the DC bylaw, that are not affected by the DC bylaw, and those remain as incentives within the gateway CIP.
And I see at planning today, we actually have a discussion about those overall incentive programs that is coming forward from planning. So thank you. Just a quick question, just on a purely logistical thing. Am I reading this right, that if we pass this recommendation today, the amendments that were passed at council are included in this new bylaw, specifically the agricultural use and the change for the apartments, that those changes are now, we don't have to make that amendment again or pass those amendments. We've done that now.
Commissioner?
Through the chair, that is correct. We've carried those from the past council meeting here.
So on that note, I'm happy to pass the bylaw as it is, and I'm happy to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Volpatti?
Thank you very much, Chair. And just to clarify one thing, so that, let's take GE, because that's our largest new industrial development now underway. That would still be permitted under the new bylaw, or the DCs under the new bylaw would not be any greater than they were when GE was approved. Through you, Chair.
Through the chair, they would be assessed actually at a lower rate, but their net effect of zero would still be zero.
Right, so zero is still zero, and that's the point I want to make. I also want to say that there are two issues that I have with the DC bylaw. Number one is with process, number two is with fact. So addressing the process first, we had 3 DC bylaw meetings where we did not even achieve quorum. I don't know where all these people were who didn't attend this meeting and make their concerns known, because they certainly didn't show up there. That's number one. And number two is, I think we really have to disassociate growth and development charges, because there's no evidence that shows us that the amount of DCs, the rate of our DCs, is anyway associated with growth. And we have perfect examples in our own region. Port Colborne and St. Catharines have no DCs in their municipality. They are the slowest growth areas in the whole region. So it seems to me that if you're trying to associate DCs with growth, it's actually the inverse. Where there's no DCs, there's no growth. I mean, seriously, what are we trying to prove here? We need evidence. We need evidence based on fact. And I know that Commissioner Mustache has a report showing that regardless of these two communities, Port Colborne and St. Catharines, DCs are not related to growth. Development is market-driven. Developers, most of the time, know where their profits are and they know what they're doing. Why we would question that is beyond my comprehension. I will certainly support the bylaw. It's a great bylaw. It allows us to put infrastructure into the ground when we need it, when developers need it. Why are developers supporting the bylaw? Because they want to develop. And they can't do it unless we have infrastructure there for them to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will take exception to the notation about the Port Colborne development charges not having an impact. I don't represent the city of Port Colborne. The mayor does. He's here today as well. But that council...
Who votes for you, Chair?
That council has made very clear that it has worked. So I just want to articulate that that may not be accurate about Port Colborne's situation, and the mayor can comment further if he wants.
Well, the proof is in the pudding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Specifically, Fort Erie has had concerns with the previous edition of the bylaw, probably for the past 3 or 4 months. And this council has been privy to some of the communication items that have been passed on from Fort Erie Council. I'm grateful to suggest that those concerns have been alleviated. I had a meeting just last week with Dean Rosiana, town planning staff, and Councillor Nutt from the town of Fort Erie, and we worked through some of the issues, specifically the agricultural concern, specifically the merging of the 2+ to 4+ bedrooms, and the brownfield concern. All those concerns were met. They're reflected in the bylaw. I have not had conversations with Mayor Redekop with respect to his communication with Mayor Campion, but whatever his concerns were or are, they have not been conveyed to me. I know Fort Erie staff and Fort Erie Council are very happy that staff have been very receptive to changing 3 specific items that they had concerns with. I have no problem supporting this DC bylaw as amended from, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. The other question I had, back in July 20th, I proposed an amendment with respect to archaeological. Now, it was a pretty wordy amendment. I just want to know where that is reflected in this DC bylaw.
Through the chair, it's in definitions and it's in eligible brownfield remediation cost, that archaeological assessments were an eligible expenditure that could be refunded in a brownfield. The intent was to keep it in brownfield and then look at the next bylaw of maybe expanding it outside of that.
Okay, so I appreciate that. Again, there's not a lot of detail to that archaeological. So as we move forward, I know that's going to be under review by December 31st, 2018. I'm going to assume more detail will go into that, but I recall that this was a interim measure to make sure that archaeological was included in the brownfield program. Does there need to be more detail to that, or what falls under archaeological?
Through the chairs, archaeological assessments, so the cost to get archaeological assessments, which is one of the things developers had made mention, are going to be eligible cost to be refunded.
Okay.
The province is also, and I'm not a planning person, the province is also looking at the archaeological issues, and I think there's going to be things coming out from the province which will then have to integrate also into the next bylaw or into another program. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a DC bylaw to have a program. You can have programs outside of the DC bylaw also. So that would be the intent, to wait to see what some of the provincial direction is moving forward. And I believe Commissioner Mustache also is looking at a regional archaeological approach to it. And those would be programs that would be under review prior to December 2018, and those findings would be brought forward.
Okay, so I just want to be clear then, specifically when you say archaeological assessment. Archaeological assessment, is it congruent with brownfield assessment? I understand with brownfield there's an environmental phase 1, there's an environmental phase 2, which leads to actual costs to remediate a program, a property, and then the record of site condition comes forward. With respect to archaeological, there's an archaeological phase 1, there's an archaeological phase 2, there's the costs associated with removing, restoring, whatever the terminology is with respect to archaeological, and then I don't know what it is, if it's a record of site condition for archaeological, but does that follow the same path? Or when you say archaeological assessment, what is included in that?
Sorry, so for great clarity, it would be the phase 1 and the phase 2 study costs would be part of what is rebatable as an eligible cost. And so the remediation costs at this point in time are not, because we don't have direction to see what would be eligible cost. Where brownfield costs, we have a pretty extensive list on what we would reimburse for it. So that is something that in 2018, the planning group will work on to develop a more comprehensive list of what would be refundable and not refundable. But at this point in time, what's guaranteed is the actual cost that's incurred by the developer to obtain a phase 1 assessment and to obtain a phase 2 assessment, but not the actual archaeological remediation cost at that point in time.
Okay, all right. So just for clarity then, and again, the amendment that was approved, that costs associated with remediating or dealing with archaeological findings be included as an eligible brownfield remediation cost for DC relief within the DC bylaw, that a glossary of definitions, terms, eligible costs, similar to how we define remediation of contaminants, be included in the bylaw that defines the best practice and methodology of identification, excavation, preservation, and removal of artifacts or items of archaeological significance be included within the bylaw, and that council authorize staff to review and report to council prior to December 31st, 2018 on ways to improve the delivery of regional incentive programs relative to planning, economic development, and financial strategies, which includes recommendations to address the challenges of developing sites that are subject to archaeological study. So that was the amendment that was approved, and I just want to make sure that that amendment, as carried by this council, is reflected in the new DC bylaw.
So through the chair, it says to report back by December 31st, 2018 on that glossary terms and that. So currently that's not in the DC bylaw because that is something that's being undertaken by December 31st, 2018. What we did include under section 4 of the brownfield remediation is what we put in immediately was indirect remediation costs include planning fees, insurance premiums, assessment estimates, preparation of record of site condition and certificate approval, and 5 archaeological assessments. So what we put in immediately was archaeological assessments. That more detailed thing is for staff to work to come back to you at 2018, and it's most likely to be in a program outside of the DC bylaw, but a funded program that would go with remediation of properties.
Okay, okay. So I'm comfortable with that, but again, I'm hoping moving forward, and hopefully the staff report that's coming forward will reveal some of the details surrounding that. I think it's important that we provide that kind of predictability when it comes to actual costs associated with remediating archaeological. That is the intent of the motion, and I'm hoping that that intent is reflected moving forward. Now, with respect to the DC bylaw, it could easily be amended to include more details with respect to archaeological moving forward.
Through the chair, no, once you're outside the 1-year period, but actually Gary is a better expert, but he's saying, yes, it can be more easily amended to include details, so.
I just want to make sure, because I don't want to get stuck where I'm waiting 5 years.
Maybe if we can have Gary address the question directly, and then.
No, there's no archaeological there. I'm talking about.
Through the chair, any amendment to a bylaw is a fairly straightforward process. Advertise, have a background study, which could be a staff report, and then have the appropriate 60 days circulation. Then council can have consider the bylaw. So it's fairly straightforward. In fact, the study would be rather simple if it's just going through a definition. The amendment would be quite quick.
Okay. All right, so I'm comfortable with that. And again, I cannot stress, and I want this put on the record, there are significant properties in Fort Erie. They call them ground zero. They have the highest concentration of archaeological in probably all of North America with respect to Indigenous. It is a benefit and a curse when it comes to trying to develop properties. So moving forward, I'm hoping that there will be some kind of incentive, some kind of cost relief, some kind of predictability for developers to make sure that they know what they're getting themselves into, and that somehow those costs can be rebated, reimbursed through the DC bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Petrowski.
Thanks, Chair. So just to be perfectly clear, Chair, through you to the Commissioner, the industrial development freeze on DCs, that's not in jeopardy for the life of this bylaw, correct?
Through the chair, it's a grant program, and yes, the original, when it was originally passed, that was maintained for the 5-year period of the bylaw.
Okay. And just for clarification purposes, the reason why there's even a dollar value assigned, whether it's going up or down, is because of we have to account for the lost monies, correct?
Through the chair, that is absolutely correct. You have to essentially, anything you give away under the DC bylaw, you have to fund from levy or rate. So we have to track it all. It's a reporting requirement under the Act, and that's why we have to do that.
Okay, fine. So then if the next GE or those pursuing projects like Amazon.com, I'll try to keep a straight face, but the next GE that comes to Niagara with the similar kind of project, nothing changes from the previous bylaw to this bylaw in terms of the treatment we'll be giving them, regardless of where it is.
Through the chair, that's correct. It's the same process.
And that applies even to the CAO's comments about the gateway considerations or whatever?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So the last kind of round of questions, Chair, is with regards to the housing, what is in the current bylaw, what is for single detached, let's say we'll use that, the current dollar value, and what's the proposed increase?
Yeah.
Kind of the most common unit of development.
Through the
in Niagara.
chair, the former bylaw had a rate of $10,448 for single detached, and the new bylaw is $15,544. Going up to 17,000 and change in 2 years.
Okay, and just again for the public record regarding the rationale for that 70% increase, does staff feel that the 10,000 has been there for quite a while? Is it fair to say, and it's all relative, was 10,000 too low?
Through the chair, that's a qualitative term. What I can say is even at the $17,000 rate, we are still one of the lower jurisdictions in Ontario. So if you compare to other jurisdictions, we are still low.
Okay, thanks. But the rationale for that number has to be somehow tied, obviously, to demand on money, correct?
That's correct. So there's an underlying capital plan which was essentially based on our water, wastewater master plan, our transportation plan. That makes up almost 90% of the capital plan that's there. Also, that was added to this DC bylaw was the ability to fund long-term care homes and to fund social housing through the DC bylaw. So when you look at that whole capital plan, you spread it out, that was the nature of the increase.
Okay, thanks. And Chair, to put it in perspective, I was talking to a home builder in, just to use for example, Rolling Meadows, 2 years ago, maybe 3, a home that was selling for $500,000. That exact same home today is listed at about $850,000, and that increase of $350,000 almost perfectly matches at 70% our increase. In relative dollar terms, the extra $7,000 to those homeowners who are making, as I said in earlier comments, at least $100,000 or more in profit, which they're passing along, is really nominal. So I support the principle of what we're doing, because the homeowner, the developer is passing it on, the homeowner will determine whether there's final value in that, and an $850,000 home, which I think is a fantastic number, and I don't mean fantastic great, a fantastic high number, I think in the whole scheme of things is relatively nominal, as I said. On the flip side though, and I hope the CAO is listening, I have very low confidence at this time, looking back over especially this term, but into last term, of what we do with that money once we get it, because of the nature of projects like Niagara Lake sewage treatment. The Commissioner talked about water, wastewater, Welland. I wish we had confidence in passing this bylaw and knowing that the monies are going to be spent where projects will come in at the price tag and on time. And that's not happening right now. So the flip side of getting more money is spending the money properly. And I hope over time, and we have a new CAO, that changes like yesterday, Chair, because that's a real problem. So I support it. It's a nominal amount, but it's still an amount the new homeowners are going to be paying. But I hope we learn to spend it a little bit more responsibly, because there's no record or track record or history that we've been doing that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sendzik, my practice is typically to allow committee members to speak prior to non-committee members. If you don't mind, I'll move to Councillor Diodati and then Maves. Councillor Diodati.
Thank you, Chair. You know, overall, I am in support of the updating of the bylaw for DCs, because we do need to fund the roads and the sewers and the public buildings and the waste treatment plants, and it's a lot of money. And development certainly should pay for development. But the one concern that I've brought up with staff, and I don't have it quite resolved yet, is that I believe the feeling coming from Niagara Falls is that the hotel industry is going to be unfairly targeted through this. By blending the hotel DCs in with commercial, it effectively is going to almost triple hotel DCs. In Niagara Falls, we already have more than 20 hotels on the books to be built, and then they wait for a catalyst. Last time it was the casino, and we had a lot of activity, a lot of construction jobs, a lot of development that's really great for our trades. Well, now that we're building a new 5,000-seat theater, and already I can tell you, I know that we've got some major proposals coming forward. I think this is going to work against what we're trying to do. My concern, if it was a small increase, but a tripling of it is significant. Now, I know that at planning today, there's a report where we're looking to give an overview for incentives at planning, but unfortunately that happens after this meeting. So and I'm not a member of planning, but if I knew there was some kind of means to temper this, to not discourage the development that I believe is about to happen with our hotels, I'm just concerned. So at this point, I would rather defer this until we get more information from our planning, which happens this afternoon. So I can't support this at this point. I do support it overall, but I don't think that the hotel industry in Niagara Falls and around the region, wherever hotels are going to be built, are going to be overly incentivized by tripling the DC. So those are my comments for now. I apologize that I don't really have a clear answer at this point but I think we can resolve it within what we're doing. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I certainly do want to draw attention to it, that it is a concern from Niagara Falls, and I hope we can find a solution to it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maves?
I'll ask the question that I can tell staff when to answer. How does this DC bylaw triple hotels DCs?
Through the chair, we had a separate class for hotels in previous bylaws. I think it was $3 some odd cents per square foot. There was very little activity. In 4 years, there was only about $30,000 collected from that hotel DC. Gary can better answer, but I think we were one of only 2 municipalities that actually had a hotel class that was separated. So what we did was we condensed it with our commercial rate. Our commercial rate was high. By bringing in the hotel class, it lowered it for all commercial ratepayers. So before it was going to be $12.62 per square foot for commercial. By then amalgamating hotels, it dropped it down to $10 a more competitive commercial rate. So now you're sharing it amongst a broader class. So strategically, we lowered commercial rate by blending it with hotels. As far as council can make any decision and create any program it wants for targeted incentives. And we, as staff, we believe, and because the DC bylaw says you must fund any of these exemptions or grants, as staff, we believe it's important to have these programs identified and funded to create whatever kind of economic attraction you want to have. So to me, the best solution is always, just like we do with industrial, this council made a decision that says industrial is an important investment tool that we want to attract. We set up a program for that. We fund the program and we rebate DCs for it. If you wanted a tourism economic fund, we would suggest we make that, fund it, and rebate it to have those targeted impacts. And so any type of incentive program you'd want, you can do that through a program.
Okay, with regard to this bylaw puts in place these new DC charges from now to August 31st, 2019, and then they bump up again August 31st, 2019 to August 31st, 2022. What's the opportunity to amend, say there's a category where, like long-term care, where we've now gone from $486 per residential unit, goes towards the long-term care fund. We're going to jump that to $12.12. What's the opportunity between now and phase 2 to amend those types of amounts within the DC bylaw?
Through the chair, I think Gary kind of outlined the steps that you have to do. You have to have a background study. You have to give appropriate notice and bring the changes through. Or alternatively, as I said, you can keep the bylaw in place and bring in a program to incent the activity that you would like.
Okay. Because the two largest numbers obviously are long-term care, and that's actually the redevelopment of 3 existing homes that's principally going to go toward, which offends the principle of DCs are supposed to play for new development. So that's something that I think we need to be aware of, and it may be something that can be adjusted in the future. But I'm supporting the bylaw as it is. I'm not a DC fan. I think it's a hidden tax. I've said this many times before. I think that over the years that the legislation around DCs has been manipulated, and it's become a kind of the hidden tax and the hidden way to grab revenue. That said, I want to point out that at one point in time, this bylaw came forward, and it was over $19,000 per single and semi-detached dwelling, and the apartment rates were higher. And staff went and worked with industry, with the municipalities, and several others, and they took the two capital programs, water, wastewater, and the transportation, and that determined the amount of money we were going to require from DCs, and they sharpened their pencils, and they worked with the community members who have DC bylaws affecting them the most, and they've knocked it down to this $15,500 per unit. We've also made some changes on the apartment dwellings. So because we engaged in that process, and it was a fair and reasonable pull and tug and compromise, I'm going to support the bylaw, but I do think that we do need to be vigilant. The mayor raised an issue just now that I was unaware of. I'm satisfied with Commissioner Burgess's explanation of how going forward in the future, if we're going to get a boom or we think something's going to be beneficial, we can deal that perhaps on a program or one-off. I do believe, I disagree with Councillor Volpatti, that DC's and taxes are a huge incentive. We wouldn't have CIPs, and everyone around this table in their communities wouldn't have CIP programs, which by their very nature reduce DC charges, if we didn't believe DCs made an impact on investment decisions. We wouldn't have just all approved the municipal capital facility to build an apartment building with some Niagara regional housing in it if we didn't believe that it was an incentive. So to say at one point and to vote on one thing for CIPs and municipal capital facilities to reduce DCs to incent that development, and then turn around and say DCs have nothing to do with whether or not people decide to develop, I think is incorrect. It is a factor. It's definitely not the one and only or the overriding factor, but it is a factor. So I think we do have to remain vigilant about DCs going forward. But I'm satisfied with the compromises that have been made to date, so I'm going to support the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sendzik, thanks for your patience.
No, thank you, Chair. And I think a lot of the questions have been asked. Councillor Petrowski asked a number on the industrial that I was lining up just to get some information on, and Councillor Maves, I think, did a good job on the feeling of DCs. And I would just like to say that although Councillor Volpatti's not in the room right now, she's not correct on the DCs in St. Catharines. It's an incorrect comment to make, where we have had substantive growth in our downtown. You look at, we've got 2 student housing apartment complexes and then another one forthcoming. And when we looked at one of the incentive packages, it was the no DCs in our downtown. So we are landlocked as a community. So anyone to say that we're not growing, it's because the provincial government has effectively put up borders around us that wouldn't allow us to grow. And if we didn't have the green belt, we'd probably be one of the fastest growing communities in Niagara just by sheer proximity to the GTA. So those kind of comments are unfortunate, but hopefully for the record it's been corrected. The only question I'd like to ask is focuses on the social services side of it. So the new additions to this DC bylaw has been corrected, and I'm just asking for correction. Social housing, long-term housing, social and children's services, health. So what are the new ones that wouldn't have been on the previous bylaw?
So the 2 largest ones was affordable housing, and I don't have my background study in front of me, but affordable housing and long-term care were not part of the previous bylaw, and they are part of the new bylaw. So what we do is we take those costs that were associated with that to maintain service levels and put that into the capital plan, and those are the costs that then get spread out in the DC calculation.
So those are the only 2 new.
Sorry, through the chair, waste diversion was also added. That was not previously part of the bylaw.
Okay. And then through the chair, is there a capacity under something like social housing to be able to waive the DC fees if a community deems it as such and asks the region to waive those fees if there's an opportunity?
So within the bylaw, if someone is creating an affordable units inside an apartment building, written in the bylaws, that's already exempt. So if you have some that are built, and then outside the bylaw, we can certainly do that through either this program, a municipal capital asset program, or other programs that are coming forward to this council with the ASD review.
Okay. So I'll add very briefly, Mr. Chair, because it's not my committee to be sitting at, that I do agree with Councillor Maves, and I do agree with Councillor Champion in terms of the impact that this potentially could have on the growth projection. I think we're going to continue to grow as a region, but the accelerated growth, and I think Mayor Diodati and Mayor Campion, Mayor Diodati pointed out that this could have a negative impact on the growth of hotels. So that is a direct line to the scalability of this increase. So the caution that I think Mayor Campion and Mayor Redikoff are also putting out there is that we have a capital plan that we're projecting, and I think Chair Barrick, you've talked about all these other projects that have been sitting in a queue that we haven't even spent $1 on, that they're sitting there and we've accrued for them, and yet it's 2 to 3, 5 years out before the project is even materializing. Those, it's like we're holding funds in a bank account and we're not releasing them, or we're just collecting them from people for a later date. And I guess that's the caution that a few of us are raising, is we want to see an accelerated growth curve, and this one may be just bringing that acceleration down a bit. And I guess the check is going to be in 5 years to be able to look at where we're sitting as an acceleration. Did we hit our targets? Or are we under target? And I'm hoping in Niagara Falls that it's not going to have a detrimental impact on the growth of the hotel industry. So I can't vote here, so I won't be indicating my support or not, but hopefully those comments are for consideration at a future date.
Well, it's great, Councillor, and thanks for your attendance this morning and for correcting the record with respect to DC impacts in St. Catharines. Again, in Port Colborne, there was a clear increase in housing starts when the city waived its development charges. Councillor Diodati, see you want to speak a second time when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So I would propose an amendment be included in this that would include a hotel incentive program, excuse me, be included in the planning department's review of all the region's incentive programs to keep the rate for hotels at or near the current rate, an incentive to do just that. And even if there has to be a time frame to be an incentive for them to build, I'm good with that, because I don't think it should be in perpetuity. But I think that jumping 300% is too significant. That I think it's too significant in light of what I believe is about to happen, in light of the fact we've got more than 20 hotels on the books, and I happen to know that we have more coming to council next week. So I just wouldn't want to stunt that growth. I see a lot of excitement coming, a lot of construction jobs, and a lot of trade opportunities that I think will be good for the whole region.
Thank you, Councillor Diodati, seconded by Councillor Volpatti. We'll see if we can get the clerks to put it on the screen. I think it's a great addition to this motion. It's in order. I'll take any questions or comments on the amendment, unless committee members want to wait to see it on the screen. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I fully support this. When we look at the numbers with respect to tourism, tourism businesses in Niagara Falls, 427. Number of tourism employees, 15,350. I think this sends a strong message that tourism is part of our economic agenda, and providing those incentives for hoteliers and certainly the service and tourism industry is very, very appropriate. When I look at some of the numbers, absolutely staggering. When you look at the labor force in the accommodation sector, 26.8% comes from hotels. So I think it's appropriate. I fully support it, and I look forward to staff coming back with some very creative ideas how we better incentivize our hoteliers.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Petrowski on the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Could maybe Councillor Diodati just expand a little bit on the opportunities seeing? Is this shovel in the ground, concrete going up in the air projects, or is this just kind of initial stuff? And because on the flip side, I heard anecdotally, there's sometimes concerns of overcapacity. So if he can just put a perspective around his comments, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to, Councillor. I can tell you the last 3 years have been record years in the city. I know the casino had upwards of 9 million visitors, and there's been a shortage of rooms in the city. Speaking with all the hoteliers, they all wish they had more. We've got, I believe it's 22 on the books pre-approved, and we've got some more coming to council this Tuesday coming. And I know there's some other major tourist developments in the works right now. It's funny because when the casino, Niagara Falls View Casino was built, that created it was such an incentive that hotels went up all around it and added to our tax base. Now that we've got the new theater, we broke ground last week, the same thing is happening. A lot of them have been waiting for a positive sign to move forward, to start development. And as I say, we've got more coming this week. I know that we've got a couple of other major acquisitions by some outside investors that are looking to do some substantial development. And I really think we're going to have a great opportunity for all the trades looking for work in the area. It's going to be a real exciting opportunity. There hasn't been, but we just broke ground this past week, and I think it'll be the incentive that they've been waiting for to show confidence in the tourism industry. And I would hate like heck to have such a significant spike and stunt that opportunity right now before us. So, and as I say, I'm okay if our incentive planning committee comes forward with an incentive that gives them a window in which they need to develop to take advantage of it. I think that's fair and that's reasonable, and it's probably a good idea. But in terms of right now, there's not enough rooms right now to service the demand.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Well, I hope he guarantees that every hotel room that goes up has to automatically qualify for sleep cheap night so that the locals can take advantage of this incentive that we'll be subsidizing. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Quirk to the amendment.
Just very briefly, I'm happy to support an incentive program like this. I am concerned that when you talk about the huge number of hotels that are going up and the number that are on the books, it seems to be an industry that doesn't necessarily need an incentive. I think people want to build hotels in Niagara Falls. I do understand in fairness that to do an overnight tripling of the development charges as a fairness issue is not fair. So when we do look at this program, I would just maybe comment to staff that it should be something that sort of phases in the full cost of the development charges over the life of the development charge bylaw, but happy to support it at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers to the amendment, a recorded vote has been requested. Look to the clerk to open the vote when ready. Okay, that is carried. Thank you. If we go back to the, that will be corrected, I believe.
Chair, I meant to vote yes. Sorry about that.
Okay, so two corrections. Campion is a yes. Okay, back to the main motion. I recall the speakers list. Oh, Councillor Diodati, you still have the floor. Okay, get the main motion back up as amended. I'll call the question. I believe there's a recorded vote requested on the main motion as well. So again, I'll look to the clerk to open the vote when ready. Okay, that is carried. Thank you. Moving on to CSC C28 with respect to results from insurance RFP. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Augustine. Thank you. Seconded by seconder for the insurance RFP report. Going once? Going twice? Just to get it on the floor would be great. Councillor Timms? It's on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be signed in so I could vote on this.
All right.
Support the motion.
Okay, so you're fine to second it to get on the floor? Okay, thank you. Looking to any speakers on this item? Councillor Quirk?
Chair, I have a question, but it's more to do with the confidential item that was referred to us at council last week, and I'm wondering if it's appropriate to go into closed session and ask questions of that memo before further discussing this this proposal or this motion.
Yes, I think that's fine, Councillor. So, however, if we can, we'll just go in camera to deal with all the items rather than just this one.
So is it possible to defer consideration of this till after closed session? Is that how that work? Or we just go into closed session now and talk about all the items?
I believe we will consider it in camera and then whatever comes out of that. So if you want at this point, I think a motion to move in camera is appropriate. However, to deal with Councillor Volpatti.
So moved.
Oh, okay. If it can also include the other items, a matter of litigation, potential litigation, a matter of labor relations, and the item that was referred there already, which was the disposition of land. So that's fine, Councillor Volpatti, move in camera. Seconder for that. Councillor Quirk, thank you. All in favor of going in camera to discuss those items? Opposed, if any? That's carried, thank you. I will look to the clerk to advise when we're ready. Okay, great, thank you. So we went into in camera with the insurance matter already moved and seconded. So we'll begin there again. I can't recall if we had a speakers list at the time, but this is the motion before us. I believe Councilor Petrowski had some additional questions in open session.
Thank you, Chair. So just for the public record, last iteration of this, a year and a half ago, whenever it was, we had hired a third party to do some evaluations, and I might get the gentleman's name wrong, but I think his name was Harder or Harding, and he had a pretty substantial role in that process. I didn't like the process anyway, and now I understand we're using a fairness advisor, J.D. Campbell and Associates. What connection is there between J.D. Campbell Associates and Mr. Harder with this evaluation?
Through the chair, there's no connection.
So Harder is not involved anyway?
Through the chair, not through the fairness advisor. Mr. Harder was a sub-consultant to the insurance expert that was engaged by the region.
Okay, so it wasn't part of fairness. So we had hired again another insurance expert to do the review of this RFP, and who was that who was that on the at the high level?
Through the chair, I know that the name was in the report, but I will see if the Director of Legal Services has the name.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, it was Somerset Consulting.
Okay, thanks. And did Somerset Consulting declare that Harder, who I think has a commercial relationship with Cowan, or I stand to be corrected, but did Somerset declare that Harder was involved, or they were going to be subbing out this work?
Thank you. Through the chair, so all the conflict of interest waivers were obtained during the process, and it was known to us that who the sub-consultant was at the time, and the fairness advisor had reviewed the matter.
Okay, fair enough, but that doesn't mean the fairness advisor was right. Harder was involved in the first evaluation. Harder is involved in this evaluation. Can the acting commissioner chair confirm that I believe, and I'm going back, that Harder had a commercial relationship with one of the insurance companies from the past?
Through the chair, they signed a conflict of interest form, and as far as I know, there's no financial relationship. The insurance industry is no different than the banking industry. They all work for some insurance company at some point in time. That's how you gain that expertise. Doesn't mean that 20 years later you still have a conflict of interest when you're evaluating proposals.
Okay, but so somebody signed it. That doesn't mean it's accurate. So we had a problem with the last round in the last evaluation, to say the least. So, okay, at least I flushed that out. As far as the statement about occurrence, so whether you have an occurrence-based quotation or a per vehicle, when you use an example of, and I'll use an example, so of multiple vehicles being affected, obviously on a per vehicle coverage, in a worst case scenario, that could be more expensive than a per occurrence. What in the history of the region has been our one-time worst per occurrence hit on number of vehicles?
Thank you. Through the chair, this reminds me, if we go back a year, similar questions were asked about a $500,000 deductible, and staff was chastised at that time for exploring a $500,000 deductible because it never occurred in the past. And then if I roll forward 8 months later, we got a $1.3 million hit. So for us to predict the future is always tough with insurance. The philosophy that we have here at the region is we want to cover catastrophic losses. And we view catastrophic losses as $1 million or more. And therefore, in any situation where we're going to incur a loss of $1 million or more, we want coverage above the $1 million. Whether that is based upon 3 ambulances getting burnt at the same time or some other combination of some incident, what we've said from a financial risk point of view is we can absorb $1 million, but anything more than $1 million, we want coverage for that. So at this point in time, we're lucky that we haven't had that incident. We've had one issue over $1 million earlier this year, and I just hope we don't jinx ourselves, because the last time these hypothetical questions got raised, I got dinged for $1.3 million loss. So, but I can say that that's been our biggest loss to date in recent history.
Okay, so what was the nature of that loss? Was it a vehicle situation?
Through the chair, that was a NRP equipment situation.
Okay, one piece?
Multiple pieces in a room.
Okay, so that was one example, and apparently in the last round, we had the ability to talk back and forth with people and under this quasi-negotiated RFP situation where we could ask them, I don't know, in this opportunity, did we have the latitude to ask the other two providers or whoever the provider was, whether they would mutually consider per occurrence or per item? Or were those restrictions not permitted this time? But apparently they were last time, because there was a lot of chatter last time, as far as I recall.
Through the chair, there was no back and forth last time. All it was there was a post-closing addendum that was issued to clarify the responses and to ask for refreshed responses if they so chose. So there was no active negotiation. It's not allowed with our RFP process. It's something that's coming to PAC later about attempting to do negotiated RFPs. So last time it was done through a post-closing addendum. This time it was not. There was none of that. It was just the RFP process was ran as described in the original RFP issuance.
Okay, fair enough that we're characterizing chatter a different way, but if you're clarifying this time, though, for the record, there was no opportunity to clarify and say, so you're offering it, because the specific question, Chair, was, did you have the latitude to ask? It seems to me that your coverage is per item as opposed to per occurrence. Did you ask, did you have the latitude to ask if they would mutually consider per occurrence? That's supposed to be a yes or no.
Through the chair, I would say that during the process, there's always clarification questions that are allowed, and there may have been clarification questions by the evaluation, but there was no ability for them to resubmit any changes at that point in time. So it was what was submitted. If the evaluation team wanted clarification, they were allowed to clarify the details of the submission.
Okay, I guess that's a no. So as far as comments earlier, Chair, that 30 points for pricing, I look at the pricing matrix or the RFP matrix, and it says 20 and 15, that's 35. So how do you get to 30 from 20 and 15 unless I'm looking at the wrong scoring matrix?
Sorry, my apology, that was my error.
Is it 35?
It's 35, sorry, that was my error.
Okay, because I heard 30 a number of times. So the difference between JLT and FCC is 69 to 86. On the points, how many points do you think you could attribute to that per occurrence versus per item on the 17 difference? And see, this is a problem with this because some of the members of council, not me, believe that we should just take these gross scoring. Not me. We didn't do it in the police. We didn't
Council,
do it.
let's get an, we're running short on time. Let's get an answer.
I'm not worried about running short on time. I'm worried about
that's my job.
having, the job is that we got to get these questions answered.
Through the chair, I don't want to speak specifically to what the points were because that's not how the scoring gets done. Each panel member reviews the panel, they assess the scoring, and each panel member has to make their decisions and determinations according to the scoring criteria. Then there's a second step to that process that says any variance on any category that's scored, if it's above a certain delta, has to be then re-reviewed by the panel as a whole. So I don't want to say specifically what one single point led to a deduction. At the end of the day, the process was run in accordance with the rules. It was observed by an independent fairness advisor who looked at all those issues about fairness and concluded that the process was fair. So I don't want to get into whether this particular issue or point led to X number of points because I don't think you can actually trail it that way because you had different markers at evaluating it. and they may have all evaluated it slightly differently.
Okay, but thanks. So that puts us in the dark room. We don't really know. We're talking about potentially charging our taxpayers $200,000 a year more. And the example was given that it could be based on per item versus per occurrence, but I can't even know what the weighting is. Was the scoring on this one, I think I heard Chair, the Acting Commissioner say the scoring was done in the presence this time of the Fairness Advisor? Is that what I heard? He or she was sitting there as you were doing the scoring, and the subset question is, was this again this, and I don't support this consensual scoring again, where we all sit around, come up with a number, and then all agree on a number, or was it done independently?
Through the chair, the scoring mechanism is modified. Each reviewer reviews and scores independently, and then only the ones that are different by a predetermined delta then gets reviewed by a group to ensure that there's that all the markers are evaluating on the same basis. So if I scored something a 7 and you scored something a 6, that's deemed to be close enough. But if I scored something an 8 and you scored something a 3, they would say, well, either someone's reading something differently, so let's get everybody in the room to determine how one viewed it as an 8 and how one viewed it as a 3. So, and then if there is any changes to it, it doesn't mean that it's consensus, but if there are any changes to it, then the change in the marking is documented. The rationale for the change in the marking is documented through that process, and then supported at that point in time.
Okay, so the question though was, does the Fairness Advisor sit there when you did the, had to deliberate the ones that had some outlier scoring?
That is correct. Yeah, they go through that process, and they also monitor. You know, they monitor that process.
And how many people were on the scoring team with these so-called independent votes? 5?
5 is the hand signal coming from the staff.
And who were they? What titles were they? Not people, not names, but what were the titles?
I'll let Donna Pasto answer the question.
Through the chair, we had staff from legal services, 2 staff. We had staff from public health. We had staff from Niagara Regional Housing, as well as a subject matter expert.
Okay, what would a person from public health or from housing, what would their knowledge be on insurance? How would that be their expertise? That makes no sense to me.
Through the chair, you need expertise on the business, because you need to, so housing has a significant amount of assets that are deployed. So they want to make sure that the insurance product is going to meet their business needs. We try to do a broad spectrum of who's there, because it's an insurance policy for the corporation as a whole. So there's business users that are involved. There's Donna from a risk point of view is involved, legal is involved, and an outside technical insurance expert is involved. So you have business users so that they understand the risks that need to cover off. That's why public health was there, because they have significant risks. And then you have experts on a panel to try to get to the best scoring.
Okay, well, I have no problem with business users having input into the formation of the RFP, but I would be challenged as a housing expert or as a public health expert to necessarily know how to score an insurance quote coming back to me. I would think that that would be more of a financial expertise and more people from the corporate services side, because I don't know what the expertise of a housing person or a public health is in looking at an insurance quote. I see that in terms of coverages, does that suit your requirements or not? Yes, but in building up a scoring up to 100 points, that doesn't seem to me to make any sense. Bottom line is, Chair, like to wrap this up, which I'll do, is I'm not supporting charging our taxpayers an extra $200,000 on awarding this. I'm not in support of the extension. The extension should be taken off. The extension just keeps rolling this forward, which means we're nailing our taxpayers $200,000 a year, perhaps for maybe 3 years. And I'm not supporting it for 2, let alone supporting it for 3. We have to change this notion that something like this, as people try to present some complexity around it, 35 points for pricing is not enough. It should be 50 points, 60 points, something like that, to reduce that other leeway in there. If we don't understand at this point in time, it seems that we still don't, how to do this and how to put it out for just a pricing with some qualitative features, then you know what? Maybe we need to have other people figuring out how to quote this business. But 35 points is now going to throw business to somebody that's going to cost our taxpayers $200,000. I'm going to ask for a recorded vote, because if $200,000 doesn't matter, then nothing matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Edgar.
Call the question.
Seeing as you are the last speaker, that is appropriate. I'll look to the clerk to open the vote when ready, as a recorded vote has been requested. Okay, that carries. Thank you. We have to deal with the St. Catharines.
Chair, point of order.
What's your point of order, Councillor?
Just, when did we change to the 5-second or 7-second rule for voting?
It's 10 seconds.
It's 10 now?
Seconds, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So that was CSD 66, 2017. If we can put that back, that was referred to in camera. We have it back now. Councillor Augustine, I believe you wanted to speak to this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify that it's number 2, that it will be in accordance with the confidential report, ED 13, 2017. So that provides the clarity I think that folks were looking for. I was looking for it and others, so that's helpful.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And that's added in here now. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. So thank you. I'll need a mover and seconder for the confidential report, CST 62. Moved by Councillor Volpatti. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Campion.
Mr. Chairman, just to note my conflict.
Okay, thank you. It's to be received for information. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And we have confidential report GM 8 2017 with respect to ONA. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Timms. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Edgar. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. If there's no objection, CSEC 26 2017, that's the Councillor Expense Report, Councillor Expense Policy, will be dealt with at the next Corporate Services meeting. Okay, I think that's fine. All right. So that's it. The next meeting is November 8th, and I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.